The government is lying to you about leap years, and I'm here to expose them and prove why it's a sham and a con. You see, a year isn't actually 365 days, as most people know, and the government acknowledges this, and the government says, yeah, it's normal. It's actually 365 and a quarter day, which is true. Scientists have proven this correct. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that quarter of a day. You see, you can't just make a quarter of a day vanish. You can't just throw a quarter of a day in the future. But that's exactly what they're saying they're doing. They're taking that quarter day and they're just taking every quarter day for 4 years, and then at the end of it, they're just making a new one. And they're calling that the great solution because the quarter of a day doesn't get, all thrown up, and you're still keeping track of time correctly. But they're lying to you. Because let's take year one, for example. Year one out of these 4 years, okay? When this year passes, 365 and a quarter day, that quarter of a day has to go somewhere. You can't throw it onto the future. You can't do that. You can't time travel. So that quarter of a day is just getting left unresolved until the other quarter of a days line up to make a full day. But you can't just do that. You can't just make a quarter of a day disappear. Otherwise, the whole daylight cycle would be thrown off, right? Because think about it. If a year passes, 365 days, and then you celebrate Happy New Year, and everyone's all happy, but there's a quarter of a day that just didn't happen that year. And that's kind of the whole idea that I'm getting at, is that quarter of a day would throw off the whole daylight cycle if it just isn't, honored. And that quarter of a day, it's important for the day cycle because a year is 365 and a quarter days. And if that quarter of a day doesn't happen, then the whole daylight cycle will be messed up. You see what I'm saying? Because that 365 and a quarter day, that quarter day, it has to align with the daylight cycle. And they're not celebrating it. But yet, if you look up, the daylight cycle seems perfectly fine, perfectly clear. But that shouldn't happen. The only way that the daylight cycle should be all fine and dandy is if that quarter of a day is celebrated, is actually, existent. But they're not. We're not. The only way for the daylight cycle to be normal is to actually celebrate a whole 365.25 days when it actually happens. But we're actually only celebrating 365. But the daylight cycle seems fine. The sun comes up at the same time. The moon comes up at the same time. And it makes sense. To the unwise brain, it makes sense. But that's how they're lying to you. Because if the quarter of a day isn't being celebrated and the daylight cycle is still making sense, something is awry. Something is not quite adding up. Because we're living in a dome. That's right. Think like Truman Show, but global scale. Because they're controlling the day. They're controlling the sun. They're controlling the moon. They're controlling the stars. They're controlling everything daylight related. Because they're trying to say, oh no, it's just quarter day. Do it later. You can't just do it later. The quarter of a day has to happen. Otherwise, the daylight cycle will be all messed up. You know what I'm saying? So they're just adding another day, but it doesn't work like that. You can't just do that. So we're living in a dome. They're the ones controlling it. And that's how they're lying to you. Because if that quarter of a day doesn't happen, the whole daylight cycle will be messed up. And if the whole daylight cycle isn't messed up, then they're lying to you about something. So we're living in a dome. They're coming for you next. First it's the daylight cycle, then it's your job, then it's your family, then it's your income, then it's everything you ever cared about in your entire life. The government can't get away with this. Because if we let them get away with this, then they can get away with everything. Do you see what I'm saying, folks? At home? I hope you understand. I hope you wake up to the reality that is the lying government that is forcing us to celebrate this quarter of a day after 4 quarters of a day has passed on February 29th. But that's not how that works. You can't just do that. Okay? Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like and subscribe. And stay alert because the government they're gonna keep lying to you. So unless you keep watching these videos and learning about how the government is lying to you, they're gonna keep, getting away with it. So I'll see you next time. Stay safe.